So I guess the wildest thing I've ever experienced happened last year, and I still don't know how to explain it without sounding like I'm making it up. You see, it started with these little things going missing. I live alone in a pretty quiet neighborhood, so I figured that I was just being forgetful. A protein bar here, a sock there, whatever. And then my TV would be on a different input than I left it. Nothing huge, just enough to make me second-guess myself. The weirdest part, I'd hear these faint bumps in the ceiling sometimes, and I'd chalk it up to raccoons or something. My house is old, stuff creaks, but then one night, I came home late from work and I could swear that I saw a shadow move past the vent opening in the hallway ceiling. I told myself I was tired, imagination, but I couldn't shake that feeling. So I set up one of those cheap motion sensor cameras that I bought off Amazon, pointed it straight at the attic access panel in the hallway. 2 nights later, I get a notification at 2:17 a.m. Motion detected. I opened the clip, and my stomach dropped. There was a person climbing down from the attic, like full-on, quietly stepping down the ladder, looking around, and heading into my kitchen. I froze. I was in the house at the time that clip was taken. I called the cops immediately, locked myself in my room with a bat, freaking out while they did a full sweep. They found no one at first, but when they checked the attic, there was a little setup up there. A sleeping bag, some snacks, a small camping stove, empty water bottles. Someone had clearly been living up there. The person was my neighbor's grown son, who apparently had some drug issues and got kicked out a while back. He broke in when I was on vacation a few months earlier and just never left. He'd sneak down at night to grab some food or watch TV. He got arrested, and I moved out 3 weeks later. I still have trouble sleeping in total silence because now every creak makes me think someone's crawling around above me. It was mid-March. My friends and I were in our early 20s and really into backpacking, hiking, camping, etc. Living in the Pacific Northwest, we were definitely in the right area to satiate our cravings for the outdoors. We wanted to go on a weekend camping trip, so earlier in the week, we went out scouting for an area to camp. After we drove a ways out of town, we found a rural road that looked pretty promising. A few miles down the road, we came to an intersection. We could continue straight where the paved road turned to gravel, turn left to be near a creek about 20 feet from the road, or turn right onto what looked like a little used, mostly grass-covered road. We decided to turn right and see what the area held. The grassy road followed a gentle left curve for about 100 yards and then opened up to a small roundabout with a flat, campground-looking area to the right of it. The site looked like it had been used plenty of times, but there was a lot of untouched grass on the road and a flat area, so we assumed no one had been there in a while. We liked the spot, but it was a little close to the road for us, so we decided to get out and have a look around. Shortly into our inspection, we found a trail that went deeper into the woods. We hiked up it for a quarter mile or so and really liked the way it looked. It was rural enough that we could really feel like we were in the outdoors, and there was no pesky cell reception to distract us from Mother Nature. After deciding this would be our spot for the upcoming weekend, we packed up and headed home. Once we got back to cell service, one of us used Google Maps to make sure our prospective campsite wasn't on anyone's property. To our relief, we were in the clear for several miles around the area. We decided that since we were able to get Friday off work, we would pack up Thursday after getting home and head out that night to squeeze the most out of our trip. Fast forward to Thursday night. All of our gear was packed, and we had all the food, water, and illicit substances we would need for 3 days of unwinding in the woods. As we pulled up the familiar grassy road and came around the bend, we saw the reflection of our headlights glaring back at us from the darkness, like the eyes of a large demon, angry that we'd intruded on its slumber. It was the taillights of a parked car. Our hearts collectively dropped as we slowed to a stop and decided what to do. We could hear a dog barking and saw a tent set up near the car, so we decided to turn tail and head home in defeat. After regrouping at home, we decided that if we tried again the following night, it would be enough time that hopefully whoever was there would have packed up and left. Fast forward to Friday night, we pulled up and the car was still there, along with the tent and the barking dog. Big letdown for sure, but after a brief talk amongst ourselves, we decided to risk it and stay. We parked on the roundabout about 50 feet away from the car and tent and hiked up the trail so we could be away from whoever was already there. We got out and the dog's barking reached a feral crescendo. Based on the fact that it hadn't already come over and started mauling us, we assumed it was leashed up or something. We quickly put on our packs and hiked up the trail in the dark with our flashlights on. It was a creepy walk, especially since everyone was practically holding their breath in fear of someone coming out to yell at us for trespassing or ruining their night or something, but nothing happened. After making it to a good spot and setting up camp, we got right to partying. We joked about what the camper or campers we passed must be thinking or doing right now and tried to scare each other with half-cocked theories about whoever it was and what they might do to take revenge on us for barging in on their quiet evening. Little did we know, the memory of our trip would be ruined in a way that none of us could have guessed. Eventually, we all fell asleep and the next day rolled around. I spent that Saturday hiking further up the trail and exploring. Nothing major happened, and we ended the night much the same way that we did the previous one. Sunday is when the story takes a turn. Everyone was tired, hungover, and pretty much ready to go back to civilization, so we started hiking back to the car. When we got there, we all noticed a complete shift in the atmosphere. I can only describe the scene as eerie. It felt like all the life had been sucked out of the wilderness. For the first time since arriving, the woods were completely silent. The car was still there and so was the tent, but we didn't hear the dog barking anymore. Being daylight now, we could see more of the encampment. It was unusual, to say the least. The car was up on the type of little ramps people use for working on their vehicles. The tent was open, and there was a plastic fold-up picnic table set up next to the car with all kinds of things on it. Motor oil, transmission fluid, automotive tools, a gallon of milk with the lid off, paper plates, miscellaneous food items, etc. And it looked like someone was working on their car in the middle of the woods and stopped to prepare a meal, only to seemingly vanish into thin air. Curiosity took over better judgment, and we decided to have a look. Walking cautiously through the campsite, we looked for any clues about why the person or people could have left in such a hurry. And my mind immediately went to the missing 411 cases. One of my friends pointed out that the windows of the vehicle were heavily fogged up, so we tried our best to peer inside. The windows were also pretty heavily tinted, so looking through them proved difficult, but the fog hadn't quite reached the edges of the glass. This made it possible to just barely see the silhouette of a large dog in the back seat. It sat there upright and panting hard, but not moving or making any other noise. And my heart sank. It was Sunday morning, and for all I knew, that dog had been trapped in this car since Thursday night when we first arrived. I assumed that's why it wasn't barking anymore. It probably didn't even have the energy and was likely badly dehydrated. We debated what to do and decided trying to break a window or open a door to let the dog out was a bad idea, since it could be violent or hurt itself on the broken glass trying to get out itself. We didn't have cell reception. We decided with heavy hearts that the best choice would be to drive back to town and call animal control as soon as we had service. We left, and I made the call and did my best to explain the situation to the person who answered. He told me he would head out to the area in a few hours and update me on how it went, and I thanked him, and that was the end of the call. I waited around for hours to hear back from the guy, and I started getting restless. Worried for the well-being of the dog, I ended up calling him back when it reached around 7 p.m. He said he tried to follow my instructions, but to my dismay, he mistakenly continued straight down the gravel road for several miles rather than turning right onto the grassy road. He had actually just gotten back to cell phone service when I called. He told me that he would head back there the next day and try again, as it was getting late and he had other calls that he had to get to. And I was distraught. I started debating heading out there myself to let the dog out of that vehicle, but ultimately decided it would be best to let the professionals handle it. I had no idea how good that decision was at the time. The next day I heard nothing back from the animal control guy despite several calls from me, and by about 7 p.m. I was really frustrated. desperately hoping for the best, but ultimately fearing the worst. That's when one of my friends, who had been silently browsing her phone for a while, suddenly gasped. When we asked what was wrong, she started reading aloud from her phone, and it was a news story from a city about 4 hours away from ours. To this day, I have no idea how or why they were able to report this news so quickly, and the story roughly went as follows. On Redacted Road, the same one we went down to camp, in the town of Redacted, Animal Control was called about a dog trapped in the vehicle for several days. When they arrived on the scene, they tried the door of the vehicle, which was locked. The Animal Control employee called the local deputies, and a state patrol officer who was in the area showed up to assist. Upon shining his flashlight through the tinted window of the vehicle, the state patrol officer was able to identify the body of a woman in the back seat, accompanied by the dog in question. When the local deputies arrived, they were able to open the vehicle and help Animal Control capture the dog, a pit bull who was very aggressive upon the door being opened. The woman, identified as Redacted, was deceased. Cause of death at this time is unknown. We all sat in silence for about, I kid you not, maybe 10 seconds, and then my phone rang, showing a private number. I answered, and a female voice said, "Hello? This is Detective Redacted. Is this Mr. Redacted?" To which I answered by saying, "Yes, may I ask what this is about?" Or something along those lines, and she asked if I was the person who called in the dog trapped in the car, and I told her that I was. She asked me to explain what had happened, and I told her everything from the Thursday night we went up there until our present phone call, minus the bit about us just having to read the news story. Something in my gut told me that it would be better not to mention what we had just learned, and she seemed surprised and said, "Oh, that's it?" To which I replied, yes, that was all. And as an afterthought, I asked how the dog was doing, and she said it was alive and in the hands of Animal Control, and I then asked if she needed anything else from me, and she said no, but that I would hear from her if anything else came up. The call ended, and we all started talking at once, asking each other if anyone had touched the vehicle or anything at the campsite, and to our relief, it appeared none of us had. We couldn't help but imagine what would happen had we broken a window to rescue that poor dog. The next day I called the Animal Control guy and introduced myself and apologized for his experiences after explaining that we saw a news story about what we had found. I asked him what would become of the dog, and he told me it was going to the Humane Society and that they were going to try to rehabilitate it. Apparently it had been trapped in that vehicle so long that it started eating the person who was in there with it. I asked if I could come visit the dog, and he said that right now the dog was technically evidence related to the case, and that I couldn't see it, but he would let me know if anything changed. Eventually we got word about the coroner's report. The woman was transient, a mother with an ex-husband and a 9-year-old son. She died from a drug overdose. Time of death was recorded to have happened at approximately midnight of the very same Thursday that we first went to the campsite and saw her car. After all this time, I googled the old news story about what had happened just to refresh my memory on the details, and what I found really took me by surprise. According to several other news stories that came up in my search results, stretching back to at least as early as 16 years before our event took place and up until the current year of 2025, there had been a surprising number of mysterious deaths that occur on that specific road that we found. We haven't been back to that neck of the woods since, and probably never will. This happened about a year or so ago, but I just read something fairly familiar, and it reminds me of how it still gives me the chills. I have 3 kids who are around 9, 7, and 2 at the time, and also living with my husband. We live fairly rural in the UK, just on the outside of a small village. Every night I always check the door is locked, and sometimes even the chain put across as well. This night, I was woken up very abruptly by a harsh banging on the front door. At first I thought that it was just someone drunk, thinking it was their house, but then they started trying to turn the handle. My husband wasn't near the door, and I stood on the stairs with my phone in case I needed to call someone. My husband told the man he had kids in the house who were sleeping and to go away right now. The man started rambling and slightly slurring his speech. It wasn't extreme slurring, but his voice wasn't quite right. It seemed clear that he was either on something or mentally unwell. He kept asking for a certain woman by name, and my husband told him that there was no one by that name here and to go away, and the man kept insisting that we were hiding her and said he was coming in. During this time, there were a lot of strange sounds coming from behind the door, thumping, scratching, and another sound that I couldn't quite place. My husband then told him that I had called the police. He gave a few more frantic thumps and then, I assume, left because we heard nothing else. We didn't hear anything like him attempting this with the neighbors either. And for a few hours I waited in case he came back. I had a tennis racket that I would have used if I had to, and luckily it didn't come to that. In the morning, since it was a weekend, I decided to go check outside, and honestly, I felt a little ill. There was a massive dent in the door, which I thought surely couldn't have been caused by a fist alone. Then, on the door and the panels near it, were fingernail marks and blood. It was enough that it needed to be washed off. Between the door and where the bins are, there was a smashed ashtray, also with blood on it in lots of pieces. One of the outdoor plants had been tipped over with the plant and soil all over the ground. My best guess is he tried to smash the door with the ashtray and cut himself, but that's just speculation. And my blood ran cold thinking about how clearly aggressive this man was, and we have absolutely no reason to be targeted. We told our neighbors, who were absolutely horrified, and they said they thought they heard something but just assumed it was a drunk. When we mentioned the woman's name, the neighbor says, "Oh God, said her name. She used to live where you do, a few doors down." She used to be into drugs and had a few shady people around, and the neighbor reckons maybe one of her old drug-using companions was searching for her. And even now, there have been a few incidents at her house where the police have been called, but I'm not sure what for. Now we have a video doorbell and alarms fitted, so at least a button now goes straight to a security system that, if you don't answer, will send the authorities. It didn't end in danger, but it so easily could have, and that's what's scary as hell. So seriously, she doesn't live here, and to the absolutely insane door-knocking guy, please, never come again. This happened a few years ago, and I never told anyone about it. I don't know why I'm posting it here now, but it's been on my mind again, and I just need to get it out. At the time, I lived pretty far out in the country, just me and my dog, no close neighbors, and it was usually really quiet, and I liked it that way. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night to the motion sensor light going off outside. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something, but when I looked out the window, I saw a man standing at the end of my driveway. He wasn't moving, just standing there facing my home. I don't know why, but I froze. I just stood there staring at him and he didn't move at all. The lights went off after a while and everything went back to dark and quiet, and I didn't sleep much after that. The next night, it happened again. The light came on and there he was. Same spot, same stillness, just standing there staring at my home. By this point, I was starting to get really freaked out, so I called the sheriff's department, and they sent someone to check it out, but by the time they got there, this guy was already gone. The deputy told me that it was probably just some drunk guy or someone passing through, and that I shouldn't worry unless he started coming closer. But that didn't make me feel any better, but I tried to move on. This went on for about a week. Every night, like clockwork, I'd wake up and see him standing there at the end of the driveway. And it was always the same. He never moved, never said anything, just stood there staring at my house. And it got to the point where I started closing the blinds at night, but I still felt like I could feel him out there. And then, just like that, it stopped. I never saw him again after that week. With no explanation, no reason, it just ended. I've never told anyone about this before. It's probably not that big a deal, but it's something that's obviously stuck with me. I guess I just needed to write it down. Even though this happened almost 10 years ago, I've never been able to get it out of my head, so I thought I'd post here. I was about 11 or 12 years old, living in an apartment with my mom. Right across from my apartment was a very creepy neighbor. I could write a whole book about all the creepy, wild, and downright insane things he said and did during the 2 years he was our neighbor, but this is the one thing that stuck with me more than anything else. My mom and this neighbor were having a casual conversation. Her goal was to try to find some common ground with him and clear up any misunderstandings or miscommunications that may have led to him disliking us so much. He had a pretty blatant feeling of disdain towards us, I guess. But evidently, something went wrong during the conversation because my mom suddenly came stomping into our apartment, loudly shutting the door and locking it. She was visibly upset and shaken, so I asked her what was wrong. Her voice was trembling, and she said the neighbor had said this, completely unprompted. "You know, if I were you, I'd keep your daughter away from guys like me." Now, while I'll never know exactly what he meant by that, my mind definitely had plenty of ideas as to what that meant. At the very least, it felt like a thinly veiled threat, and the worst part was that I was often home alone, since I did online school when my mom was at work. And from that point on, I never felt safe being home alone. My imagination ran wild thinking about what he might end up doing to me while I was home alone. Now, I never thought that I'd say something like this, and I feel a little guilty about it, but thankfully, he ended up dying before he ever followed through on his creepy comment. Now also, before anyone asked, my mom only told me what he said because she wanted to warn me to stay away from him and to never, ever leave the door unlocked. This is a completely true story, and it happened just an hour ago, and I wanted to talk about it somewhere. Now for context, my wife and I were on vacation in Mexico. We're both honestly loving it here, and the situation doesn't change that, but I am reevaluating security. My wife and I went out to dinner and walked back to our hotel. We got inside our room, we're setting things down and all that, and a few minutes go by and there's a knock at the door. A man quietly says something in Spanish, in an inflection that's clearly trying to get our attention. Think room service or something. My wife looks at me, wondering who would be at the door. And at this point, I should clarify that we had the Do Not Disturb tag on the door. A few seconds go by and there's a knock. My wife signals for me to go to the door, so I go over. At this point, we've made no sounds for probably a minute before and during the knocks. And just as I reach the door, the key card unlocks it, and it opens. A dirty-looking man is standing there, about 2 feet from my face. I put my hand on the door to prevent it from opening any further, and I think he was as surprised as I was. He starts speaking in Spanish, and I hear the word Wi-Fi somewhere in there, and I say, "No hablo español." In broken English, he tries to ask if the Wi-Fi is down. My wife says it's not. I'm just kind of shell-shocked by what just happened, and I keep my hand on the door as he talks and eventually leaves. I shut the door and engage the physical lock this time. I usually do this, but we had just walked in and were setting our stuff down. I talk with my wife as we try to gather our thoughts about what had just happened. Essentially, a man knocked, got no reply, and then let himself in and asked about our Wi-Fi. No, this was a clear burglary attempt. He had a master key card and thought that we weren't home. A minute or two after this went down, once we collected ourselves and understood what just occurred, I passed the information to the front desk in case this guy attempts other doors. They seemed to take it pretty seriously, but there were no updates beyond that. The fact that this just happened has my mind kind of blown, and I don't know if I've fully processed it yet. Like, what if we were back 30 minutes later? Probably would have lost some stuff. 5 minutes later, we walk in on a guy in our hotel room. What if we'd gone to bed earlier tonight? We could have been asleep. The AC is loud, and I don't know if I would have heard the knocking through my sleep. If it was going to go down, surely the way it did was optimal, but those ifs are crazy. I'll definitely be storing our valuables in the safe now. Should have done that already, but we just recently got here. Lesson learned, I guess. In the future, stuff is going immediately into the safe and the lock is getting engaged right away. It was just past midnight and my wife and I were in bed. She was asleep and I was watching TV trying to fall asleep. All of a sudden, I heard a loud thud at the back door. Our master bedroom is at the front of the house. Then I heard a bunch of bumps all along the walkway on the side of the house, and meanwhile, the dog was losing his mind. There was pounding at the front door. I thought it might be the cops or some kind of emergency, so I jumped out of bed and turned to the corner to the front door, only to see a girl, probably in her 20s, very small, yelling, let me in, 4 men in a van, they're hunting me." And I'm just responding, what the F is going on, as she's pounding on the front door. I looked around and didn't see anyone. I told her as much, but then my wife rounded the corner and said to let her in. The girl ran in with no shoes on, wearing muddied pajama pants. I told her to sit down and said that I'd check things out. As I was putting on pants, she starts yelling, "They're right here, 4 men. They want to murder me. There's one aiming at me. They want to kill me." But there was no one. She started running around our house, jumped on our bed and slammed our window shut, and then ran into the guest room, then the bathtub, and then the laundry room. At that point, I was losing my patience, so I told her, "Go to the couch and sit down. There's no one out there. If you live 2 blocks away, I'll drive you." And that was a big mistake. At this point, I realized that she was unhinged and probably experiencing some kind of neurological episode. I just wanted her out of the house, so I got the car while my wife brought her outside. I checked the mirrors, totally empty streets. The girl started saying that they were crawling on my car, and I assured her that they weren't and asked for her address. 16th Avenue and 15th Street, she said. I told her that didn't exist in this neighborhood. She screamed and said they were coming. We hadn't even left yet. I told her again no one was out there. I asked her for directions if it was close, and I followed the rough 2 blocks that way she mentioned earlier. She started spitting out wrong addresses, and everywhere she said it should be, it wasn't. And then she covered it up by saying that she was just trying to lose them, crawling around the back seat and checking out the windows. "They're chasing us on scooters. I can see the gun," she yelled. And she shouted, "Go left, right, left." And of course, no one was there. I hit the brakes, and I turned to her and said, "Sit your butt down and put on a seatbelt." And she protested, so I said that I wasn't driving until she did. And then she pointed to a really nice house and said, "That one's mine." And it occurred to me, maybe I was the one in danger. Maybe she was directing me somewhere to get jumped, so I told her, "I'm not driving you anymore. Where do you actually live, and where can I drop you off?" And she said 7-Eleven, so that's where I went. It was just a couple of doors down from my house, and I told her to stay there and called the cops. I ran back home to see if we had any old shoes that she could take, and I assumed that she had taken some kind of weird drug. 5 cop cars ended up combing the neighborhood for a while, and it was obviously her who had made all that ruckus. I hope she got herself figured out, but I left that to the cops. So this happened last night. Around 3 a.m., my brother and I were woken up by loud banging and crying at our front door. We live in a rough neighborhood, so naturally my brother grabbed his shotgun, cocked it loudly, and started yelling, "It's 3 a.m., go away," through the door. We were both tired as hell and freaked out. We'd recently had a girl from the neighborhood break into my car, so we assumed it might actually be her. I looked through the front door's window. We've got a one-way film on it, and didn't see anyone else around. I crouched near the door and listened. It sounded like a young kid, completely hysterical, begging us to help her call her mom. I told her I was calling 911 and that help was on the way. My brother, in full adrenaline mode, opened the door, still holding his shotgun, and started yelling at her to calm down. I didn't agree with his approach, but in all fairness, she had woken up about half the blocks with her screaming while she pressed up against our door. After he opened the door, I got to see her. Honestly, I was kind of hoping it was a homeless person from our area or even someone looking to do some weird stuff to us. But it was a kid. And the look in her eyes while she was kneeling at our doorstep made my heart drop. I was thinking that she was around 14, but she said someone had crashed into her car down the street, and she left her phone in the wreck so she couldn't call her mom. Things weren't really adding up as I asked her a few more questions. She kept begging me to go down the street with her, but I told her no way, we're waiting for the cops. About 10 minutes later, 3 tow trucks drove by heading toward where we told 911 the crash happened, so I felt safe enough to walk with her down the street. On the way, she kept asking to hold my hand, and I'm just thinking, you look like a teenager, you're barely dressed, and I'm a grown man walking through a neighborhood you just woke up. Not a good look. And I awkwardly asked how old she was. She said 18 and grabbed my hand anyway. I felt very uncomfortable, but her emotions were definitely outweighing mine at that time. And halfway there, the cops showed up. I flagged them down and explained the situation. Meanwhile, she kept telling the officers over and over that I have really bad ADHD and anxiety, while handing me her eyelashes. A full set of false lashes. I really didn't want to touch them, but I took them just to help her feel a little safer or whatever. And one of the cops pulled her aside and the others started casually asking me a few questions. He told me they got another call about 30 minutes earlier that a teenager had been running across someone's lawn barefoot, which, when I looked over, realized that she had been barefoot the whole time. Then I saw them cuff her. I think they suspected she was on something, which I myself thought as well. As we were wrapping up, the officers saw me still holding the eyelashes and goes, "What are you going to do with those, bro?" And I just told him I'll sleep on it. I just want to go back to bed. I headed home and started talking to one of the neighbors about it, and he assumed it was her parents' house or something, so he didn't want to get involved in domestic drama. Makes sense, and I just assumed that's why no one else got involved. I couldn't really go back to sleep because I was shaken up and pretty annoyed about her, and I imagined it was a traumatic experience for her. I don't know if this was a justified reaction for her situation, or if she really was on drugs or mentally ill, but I would definitely be praying for her and her family. I was 22 years old when this happened. I worked in a grocery store which had been featured in the news, and you could see me in the clip, and it was clear where I worked. I just came back from vacation, and a coworker told me that some guy had been coming around every day for a week asking for me. When I asked who or why they told me, they had no idea, but he was around my age and seemed a little off. A few hours passed by, and my coworker came and told me that the guy was back and again asking for me. We'll just call this guy James. I can't even remember his name anyways. In the back room, we had a computer and you could see all the camera footage from all over the store. I looked and didn't recognize who James was, but decided to go ask what he wanted. And he was clearly drunk and said that he had seen me on TV and wanted to ask me out. I replied, "I'm sorry, but I'm in a relationship," even though I was single. I said that I needed to get back to work, and he asked me if he should come with me. I was confused and said that I am working, and he then left, but I could see him through the cameras outside the store drinking. A few hours had passed, and he was waiting for me outside, so I had to use another exit when I left. The next day I came to work and saw him waiting for me outside the store. He had this huge smile on his face and walked up to me. He was really shy and didn't say a word until I said hey while passing by to get into the store, and he followed me inside and said that he needed to talk. I asked him what's up, and he replies, "How about we go to the movies?" At this point I could tell that he was really creepy, and I replied, "I'm sorry, I have a boyfriend, remember?" As I was walking away, he started following me again and asked if he should come to help me with my work. "No thanks," I replied, once again, and I looked at the camera footage, and yet again he was waiting for me outside. And at this point I started asking my male coworker to escort me safely to the tram every night when my shift ended. I started getting really scared once this had been going on for a while, and he clearly wouldn't leave me alone. I asked my brother if he could drive me to work on his motorcycle and hug me outside my workplace so it looked like he was my boyfriend and James would maybe finally leave me alone. Since I knew he was somewhere watching and waiting for me to get to work, but that didn't seem to help. I started getting messages like, "Is that your boyfriend?" and "He doesn't need to know if we go out." And I was confused about how he had gotten my number. I asked all of my coworkers, and a new one said that she'd given my number because he said he was a friend of mine. And I was pissed. At this point, I asked my male coworker to throw him out if he ever came back, which was a lot to ask. And a couple of weeks went by without any harassment, and I finally thought that he had left me alone. But boy was I wrong. I came to work one day and was in the changing room and heard that we have a new coworker and it was his first day. I didn't think anything of it and proceeded to change my clothes. Once I got out of the changing room, my jaw dropped. Another coworker said, "Hey, this is James." And I looked in horror as she asked me what was wrong. I said, "I know. This is the creep that had been stalking me for weeks." As James started to smile, I went and searched for my boss to ask him what in God's name happened. My boss said that he had no idea that this was my stalker and kind of just laughed it off as no big deal. And I told him, either he leaves or I will. And he said that I wouldn't have to work the same shift as James and that he couldn't fire him right there. But he lied. I had a lot of shifts with him, and whenever I went, he would just follow me without saying a single word, and he would just continue to follow me. I would often have my lunch break by the computer so I could see where he was. And every day I could see him just staring at me, behind me as I ate, as we had a lot of cameras there also. And this went on for a while. He would text me every day, but at work he didn't say a thing, just sit there and stare. Now my boss finally understood what a freak James was and that he really didn't do any work either, just kind of stalking me, and started to think of ideas of how to get rid of him. And one time I noticed James was clearly drunk at work and I finally told my boss. And thankfully that day, he got fired. And this is when the stalking finally stopped. This begins when I was 15. I'm 18 now, and just for some background, I work in a 5-star Michelin restaurant as a waitress in a sweet little area. And we usually don't get anyone with bad intentions, usually just snobs. On Easter Sunday of 2022, one of the busiest days of the year, a man who will be known as the Easter Man came looking for a table for one. He was in a 3-piece suit, carrying a carton of chicken eggs. He was seated in my section, so I went over to get his drink and food order. And once I got his order, he kept talking, asking about my education, what I was doing in school, and what my plans were for the future, what my hobbies were, my name, etc., etc. It was just a little too much to be polite, but I let it slide. I was busy, tired, and I didn't want any trouble, and eventually he left for the day, and I thought that was that. And oh, was I wrong. For the next couple of months, he would come in 2 to 3 days every week. He got more confident, attempting to flirt with me, ask me to come out with him after work, etc. However, things just got worse during one shift. I was walking him to his table and he slid his hands down my back and over my butt. I turned around and somehow politely told him not to touch me and not to push my boundaries as I was only 15, and he knew that. And I didn't serve him that day. Now a week later, he comes in and I refused to serve him again. My manager took over his table, yet when everybody was on break and I was the only one on the floor, he came inside, and he knew by this point that it was table service only, and he came up behind me, bringing his hands down my arms. I was shaken up, but politely again told him not to touch me. And I didn't hear from him again until next Easter, 2023. Last Easter, things got worse. He showed up again with his usual shenanigans. However, my managers were prepared this year, not allowing me to go near him and keeping me safe, though this was only useful inside of work. I walked through the town center to get to work. It's about a 25-minute walk from the train station. As I was walking to work one day, he saw me from his car and followed me into work, and I immediately told my managers, who again told me to stay away from him. A week later, I was having coffee before work and about a 50-minute walk from my job. What do you know? Guess who sees me and follows me on foot to work? I told my managers again, who kept me away from him again. Yet that day was different. He asked my managers for me, saying he knew I was there because he'd seen me. Now last year, 2024, I took a lot of holidays around Easter time and was off for exams. Supposedly he came in a few times asking for me and didn't come in much when I wasn't anywhere to be seen. It's just truly terrifying that I have a stalker who shows up every Easter.
I work at a recently built city parking garage and transit hub. And late at night, it is my job to lock everything up until the morning and patrol the dark building alone with just a radio linked to the local police department. It's a very simple procedure that takes maybe 10 minutes to lock everything up, with 15-minute walkthroughs every hour. At roughly 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm very tired from my 8-hour shift with 4 more hours to go. I drag myself through the security center, fancy talk for a room with a chair and monitors, and begin my ascent through the ramps. I listen to my footsteps echo and realize it seems quieter than usual. I can smell the typical putrid smell of the city, of the fermenting feces in the trash can from the numerous homeless from around the area using the trash bins. We had to lock down the public bathrooms to prevent damage, theft, vandalism, and most importantly, deaths from people overdosing in there in the middle of the night. I finally got to the top floor and summoned the elevator. I placed my forehead against the door, feeling the cold air rush up through the elevator shaft as it reached my floor with a satisfying... I stepped, got to the ground floor, and continued back to the office. I fling the door open and I head inside, running for the cold office room and using my magnet fob to unlock the door. The door usually gets hung up a little, so with a swift heel, I slam it shut and I make my way to the desk. The computer that runs the cameras is worthy of being called ancient. I'm pretty sure that they don't even make them anymore. Not to mention the internet that the cameras run off of are so slow that it takes forever to update. And so I sat there with my new favorite pastime, watching myself walk around with a tremendous amount of lag time. And I sat there, watching myself drudge on through the stupidly hot weather. And I laugh at myself as I watch my head land against the cold steel on top floor elevator doors. As the doors open and the light floods the area around me, my blood went ice cold. There was a man standing no more than 6 feet away, just staring at me. And as I entered the elevator, he headed for the stairs, already vaulting down the steps. My heart races as I watch each camera as he hits each floor. I hit the 4th, the 3rd. Almost seamlessly, he keeps perfect time with the elevator. My ears begin to boil as I feel all the blood rush to my head. I'm having a hard time breathing. I watch as the elevator doors close and he begins following me again, getting closer and closer after each turn of the corner. I watch as I fling open the door and he catches it, heading in right behind me, my heart pounding in my eardrums. He's inside the building. I keep watching, knowing that I should look away. But I can't find him. And then I see why. I kicked the door shut in his face, which means... As I search the room, I eventually discover that it's just me in there. I radio for a few officers to come in, and they sweep the building, giving me a slap on the wrist for not paying attention, and left. The rest of the night, I stayed in that room. I watched each camera diligently, but never saw him again. Now every time I go to work, I can never shake the feeling that I'm being watched.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my email at letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast. We can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.